Hello everyone, and welcome back to our build series here on our GP38-2. We're going to go ahead and start reassembling the locomotive now. So one of the first things we're going to do here is we're going to start putting these pickups for power back on the inside of the truck side frame so we can reattach them to the trucks themselves. So pretty simple. You just take and there's a center pin they fit on there. You just sit on there like that, and then the hardest part's getting the wheels to line up with the holes in this metal pickup here. Sometimes they can be a bit tricky. You gotta get everything to line up in there. I might have that on backward now. That's on there the right way. So normally you just take those, and once you get everything lined up, you should be able to just push it back together and it'll snap into place like so. We'll do the same thing with the opposite side one. Alright, so there's our first truck, which will be the front one put back together and ready to go back under the locomotive here. All we do is we take and run our wires up and through the bottom there. I gotta see which spot they go through, whether they go through the first hole or the second one. I can never remember. So normally I just kind of put it on there and see where they go, and you can see they fit right up through there like they should. We'll take our worm gear now and we're gonna go ahead and hook that back into the right back in, and from there all we gotta do is put our cap back on top, and our truck's now reassembled and back in our locomotive. Now we just gotta do the rear one real quick. It shouldn't take too long there. It's the same deal as the front. And as I mentioned in the first video, this is kind of one of those things that you don't have to do it, but it just really, to me, it's really important for the looks for the finished weathered model. It's these little details that'll really make a big difference when it all comes together and you're finished. So it's better to take the time and do it correct and get it done than to get done and wish you'd done it that way. So alright, so that one's all good to go now. Take and feed our wires through. Got our frame sitting there. Now I gotta fit that drive shaft back in. Let the worm gear drop right back down. And pop our cap back on. Another thing you do while you have this part is take a little bit of gear oil and put that down inside each one of these to lubricate everything, but this one seemed pretty well oiled for right now, so I'm going to leave it be. Our next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to move over to the other workbench, and we're going to take and hollow out these fans so that we can get ready to put a set of ones from Canon and Company in it. The little etched metal fan grates in them and everything, so I'll join you over there shortly. Alright everyone, we're over here at the workbench now. Pretty much this is my paint booth. We're going to go ahead and we're going to Dremel out the fans on the top of our shell here to go ahead and put in a set of Canon and Company thin wall fans that have a better detail in them. Now to do this, we're going to use just a Dremel tool, nothing crazy here, with a little cone style bit on there. What we're going to do is we're going to start right in the center, go right on down through the top, and then we'll kind of work our way out around the outside, and we'll use the actual base from the Canon to fit in there just to see when we're about close. What you want to do is you want to kind of work around, get close to the edges, and kind of work around what this raised casting area is to get the fan to fit. So you kind of leave that until the very end. If anything, you can always trim that off with a chisel blade. But let's go ahead and get this started. I'm probably going to take and edit this so that it's sped up a little bit, maybe throw a little music in the background there. So let's go ahead and get this rolling. Alright, so now we have our shell, our holes made in our top of our shell. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Steve, those holes look really, really bad. And I'm going to say, yeah, you know, you're not quite wrong there. It's kind of the way she goes when you're doing the dremeling. The main thing is you just want to make sure you have the hole big enough that you can fit that in. Because worst case scenario, you come in and you use a little bit of putty. You could kind of fill in any extra areas. This is one of them situations where you can get really crazy and get it perfect. Or you can just get the hole done and fix your mistake. Either way, never really hurts. And then like these back fans, there's actually a plate available. The name of the company that makes them, oh, it's Plano. Plano actually makes a plate that'll fit over this if you really, really screw up. But overall, you know, we got our fans good enough here to where they'll fit in there. We still got to clean up all this on the top, but we'll do that with a chisel blade just to kind of even that up and make it flat. And then these should drop right all the way in perfect. Got the holes a little bit big, but these fans have a little bit of an overhang lip anyhow, so 99% of that's going to be covered up. So you won't actually see the extra hole area. And like I just mentioned, worst case scenario, we'll throw a little putty in there, and we'll make it look decent. So we'll head back over to the workbench now and go ahead and start messing with that a little bit and getting that straightened out. Alright, so we're back over here at the workbench after taking and dremeling out the tops here of these radiator fans. We're going to go ahead and we're going to clean up these edges a little bit and smooth them up, and then we're going to test fit our little piece here that fits from the Canon company, fits in the top to make sure it fits alright. So what I'm going to do is I have a chisel blade here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to start kind of coming across here flat and just kind of cleaning up the flashing that's kind of hanging out over the top a little bit. Just try and get this smoothened out a little bit. If you kind of chip up the paint like I just did there, it's not really the end of the world. We're going to touch all that up with paint before we start our weathering and all that anyhow, so not really too big of a deal. But you just want to get this all flat so that way when you put the piece from the base piece for the Canon fan on there, it'll sit nice and flush to it. You don't want anything sticking up. So we'll just come in there and get it close. Because then too, when we put the fan on there, I use a plastic welder. It's like a plastic, it's a special kind of glue for plastic. What is it called? Styrene cement, I believe is what it is. It kind of bonds it together anyway, so it'll kind of fill in a little bit of a gap along the edge if you have one. I'll go ahead and just get all that off the top there. Try and keep the blade flat up against the flat part of the roof there. That way we can get it on there. Alright, I think that's all that off of there. So now we're just going to take our little fan base, and we're just going to set it in there and make sure it sits flat, which this one does. Let's see if I can get that to, yep. You guys can see if it sits flat now. If you kind of look from some angles, you'll see a little bit kind of hanging out around the edges. I'm not really concerned about that where the hole's a little bit too big. I'll take and I could fill that in from the backside with just a little bit of putty later if I need to. But it really just depends on how much slop I've gotten that once I get it glued in. So we'll see. Check this one. Yeah, that one looks like it's hanging up a little bit maybe. One side there. No, maybe it's not. Now, where's that hanging up? Okay. Looks like this one I need to take just a little bit more out of this edge here. So I'm going to take a blade here and just very carefully take and carve out a little bit more to that hole there. It's kind of the thing with when you use the Dremel at first doing this is you're just kind of getting a base hole just to have a good starting point, and then you could always come in with a knife and widen it out or do whatever you gotta do a little bit. So there's that one all sitting in there now. And again, got a little edge on each side, not a big deal. We can deal with that later. Let's check this last one. This last one I made a little bit too big. Yep, no, that actually fits right. We got a little gap over there again. Uh-oh. We'll putty that up. That's not a big deal. Alright, so now we have our fan holes all set up. What I'm going to do next is I want to go through and all these little nibs here where they're supposed to be lift rings and grab irons, etc. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this blade and just cut them off and flatten them out, because we're going to be drilling those out for all the grab irons. So just want to come in and just gently pop those off. Don't want to take any of that rivet detail off, but it's not exactly the best on these models because these are pretty low budget models, but it's still there. I'd like to keep it there if I can. So I think go in there and take those off. You got these up here as well, just nice and easy. Yep. Just make sure it's showing up on the camera. There we go. I have to say, for any of you watching this, the hardest part of doing this is trying to film it. You know, that's a bit of a challenge when you're not used to filming yourself work on something. Now this one's a bit of a booger here, this one down in between. I think I can get, yep, there we go. Just gotta get down in there. Yeah, got it. Yeah, put a little chip there. Not a big deal. We'll get this here. Alright. So that's all the ones on the roof area. Now I've got this one over here on the side. Yep, get that over there. Get that off of there too. And let's kind of get that there. I took a little paint with it, but oh well, what are you gonna do? Now we'll come in and we'll get this side one as well. Right. Well, for those of you watching this, that one's going to take a little paint with it when you do it, but again, not the end of the world. So now the fun ones, which are all these ones on the back, these ones aren't really sticking up too much. There's a little slotted hole right above them. So these ones you don't really need to do too much with. I just like to flatten them down. Alright, there should be one over on this side as well. Okay, so we got those all off. We'll come up to the front. Now these ones, on Conrail units, these have the cab signal box over here on the conductor or on the engineer side. So these grab irons being here technically aren't even supposed to be here. We're going to relocate them over to this side. So we're gonna really try and get these completely flat, which generally isn't too big a deal. It's just the hard part's getting into there with the blade at a decent angle where you're not cutting a hole in the dang thing, but there we go. We'll do this one on the top. Just nice and easy. Alright, now on to the ones on the nose. Hopefully these ones should go fairly simple. Just get in there and pop those. Alright, so that should be, I gotta think here for a minute. I believe that's all of the little deals you gotta take off there. Alright, so next, what I'm going to attempt to do, this is a bit of a tricky one. This is going to have operating marker lights on it. So the tricky part to doing this is I want to drill out the center of this hole here, but I don't want to take all the stuff around with it. But trying to drill the center of that hole when it's round is kind of a bit of a pain in the rear end. So what I'm going to attempt to do here is I'm going to lay the blade flat on like the outer edges of that and just try and catch that middle part where it's sticking up, as we just did there. You guys can see that there. You just want to take that middle part out, that way when you go to drill it, it's not a real pain to get to with the drill bit. There, you got that one. These rear ones, the same deal. Just set down on the outer circle basically and let that be what you hold the blade up against, and take that middle circle out. Alright, so we got all those all situated there. So now for the drilling part, which will be the next bit of this project, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start drilling out all of our holes for our grab irons, all of the lift rings, anything that we're going to have a hole for detail wise. I want to go ahead and get drilled out right now. So I'm going to grab my little drill bit holder here and find the smallest one. Let's see what bit that would be. I think that's this one. Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, that is the smallest bit I got. Alright, so I grabbed that. Gotta get our finger drill here. I got this thing a few years ago on eBay. I don't remember what store I bought it from or anything, but it's just a little finger drill that you take and you put the bit in, you tighten it up, and use this to drill out all my holes for everything. So now this bit is a little bit bigger than what you need to do this, but the problem I run into a lot of times is when you use the smaller bits, they tend to break a lot, and that drives me absolutely nutty trying to do that. So I always I'll have a little bit bigger hole when I'm doing this, but it ends up being a lot simpler to do. So if I gotta put a little extra glue in there when I glue it in the lift ring or whatever, that's not really the end of the world to me, at least, to have to do that. So I'll start drilling all these out. Do the ones for the lift rings, do ones for the little grab iron back here on the back of the unit as well. There's our first two holes drilled right there. Like I said, they're a good bit bigger than you need, but when you use the CA glue to glue in your lift rings and all that, etc., it'll kind of fill in your excess space and just makes it a lot easier on you when you're trying to do this, as opposed to using those really small paper thin drill bits that will really kind of break every time you try and drill with them. I avoid those things at all costs. Let's do these first three. I'm going to show you a technique for the front here and a few other things, and I'll probably drill the majority of these off camera, so this isn't a half-hour video on drilling holes. But what we're going to do up here in the front, because we're relocating the grab iron for the cab signal, so I went ahead and I already grabbed a grab iron for what we're going to be using here. This is a little drop grab iron from Tichy Trains. I buy these in bulk generally. So what I'll do is I'm going to refer to my prototype photo for one, to get a good idea of exactly where these have to go, where the holes are for them. And that'll kind of give me a better reference for when I'm trying to get the holes right for these. Let's see if I could find that here. Alright, 8204. Bingo. That's not a good side one. Alright, so yeah, I don't know if that's going to show up or not there. There we go. So when we look at our photo here, you're probably not going to be able to see it very well in there, but there's the grab iron starts right next to the handbrake housing there. Now this is the unit after I went to CSX, but they didn't move the grab irons at all. They left them where they were. So that kind of helps us with putting our hole spot together. So what I like to do when I'm kind of mocking things up and getting things ready is I'll take, like with this, I got the grab iron. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of paint, and I will take and I'll dab the ends. Let's see, is that going to show up there? Just get the end of the grab iron in a little red paint here is what I'm using. And what that does, that'll kind of give me a way to line that up there a little bit. So let's see if I can do this without... You can pull this off here. So it's going to go right about there is where I want the holes. So I'll just touch the ends of the grab iron down. That should give me two little paint dots. That did. So if you could just barely see those on there, they're pretty small. So now I have those. the next thing I will do is I'm going to grab a thumbtack, like what you'd use to hang something up on the wall. Now you're thinking, what in the world are you going to use that for? Well, what I'll do is I'll take the edge of this tack and I'll press it right in that paint spot. And what that does is that gives me a little indent that the drill bit will sit in when I go to start drilling this out, so the bit doesn't walk around too much, because that's another thing that could be a bit of a challenge with doing something like this, is your bit's going to want to walk around when you're doing it. So if you get that little nib in there, it'll kind of give a spot for the bit to sit in, kind of help keep it in place, and it'll drill right through it. So let's go ahead and get that one, this first hole in there. So there's that one. Now you just got to do the one next to it. Again, that bit will sit right on that little nib you made with the tack there, and it'll just stay right in that spot. So if you're ever trying to drill a hole in a shell and you're having a bit of trouble getting the bit dot to walk around, that's a little trick you can do there to kind of help out a little bit and make life just a little bit simpler. So there's that one. Now we just got to go ahead and do the one on top. So we'll do the same exact process as the last one. We'll just take a little paint and just very carefully and kind of put it down up there. We're about where it should be. This is kind of one of them things where I've mentioned to you guys a boatload of times already. I try not to drive myself too crazy with getting things, you know, perfect to the exact spot on everything. I kind of like to get things 90% there and just be happy with that, because if you try to really, like, if you tried to measure all this out, you'd be ripping your hair out trying to get this stuff exactly perfect. So yeah, somewhere right about there ought to do it. Get that. That paint didn't take. Get a little more paint and try again. Let's see if that'll do it there. This is another challenging part of these grab irons, is just trying to hold them with the tweezers here. There we go. Alright, I think that paint ain't sticking. Oh, you guys are watching it live. Paint ain't sticking. Get a little more paint. Now we got paint on there. Oh yeah. Try this again. A little bit more paint. Let's see. Okay, there we go. That's much better. So now we got our paint on there. We grab our thumbtack. Make our little guide holes here. Just press that right on down in there. Those look pretty straight, good enough for me. That's one thing about doing grab irons. Any of you guys watching this, it's really a pain to get these holes perfectly straight and lined up and all that. I've done a boatload of them, and it's always a challenge. I think there's a few places that make like little drill templates and such, but I never really got around to buying those. I always just kind of drill it and make it work, and the more you do it, the better you get. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and drill out the front and the back ones, and then I'll get back to you when I start doing, when I drill out the holes for the, what the heck there, the marker lights there. Alright, so we have all our holes drilled for all our grab irons, our lift rings. Went ahead and got all the grab irons there in the front, and also while I was in here, I did, kind of hard to see there, let me see if I get the back to come out better, the holes for the coupler lift bar that will also be installed. I went ahead and drilled those out. I forgot to mention do that in the last part there, but get all the small holes drilled at this stage. That way when I'm ready to go ahead and put in the actual detail parts, the holes are all there, everything's ready to go. So what we're going to go ahead and do next is we're going to prepare all of our holes for our lighting and start getting things ready to go with that. So what I like to do for like the marker lights and all that, the last part we shaved that little rounded tip off there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tack here and I'm going to press it down right in the center there. And what that's going to do is that's going to give me a little spot, you can see that there, for the drill bit to sit in when I go to drill that out. Because I'm going to drill those out so that way we can put an LED in there. So go ahead and do that one. I'll go around and do the same thing with the front here. Alright, so we have our holes marked out here on the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my drill, my finger drill here. And I'm going to take and go ahead and start drilling these out here. I use a drill bit that's a little bit bigger than the one I used for the grab irons, but it's not big enough to use up that whole hole spot there. And the reason I do that is because a lot of times when you drill these out, they won't be perfectly centered. And if you start off with a smaller bit, you could kind of work it around a little bit and round out that hole to whatever you need, and then come in with a bigger bit and even it out. So you can see here, we're a little bit too far this top side, so I want to work that down a little bit here. So I'm just going to kind of take that bit and kind of work those edges a little bit there, try and open that up a little bit. And then when I come back with a bigger bit, what I can do is hit that and it'll open it the rest of the way up. What I like to do is I like to get these holes, I don't want to get it all the way to this outside ring, but I'd like to take it out close to it. The reason being is on the real locomotives, there's that, there's like an outer ring there, and then there's a lens that's on the inside. So I try to leave the outside ring and then have it so that the lens will sit inside. The main thing with that is you want to kind of make sure that you leave that there, so that way you want to make the hole big enough to fit an LED in. That's kind of the big hassle there, is making sure you have a hole big enough to fit an LED, but it's not giant to where it looks kind of goofy. So there we go. Got that one started out pretty good there. That ain't too bad. We can work with that. We'll take a little bit off this outer side. Alright, so I'll go ahead and get the back ones drilled, and then I'll come back here when I get the bigger bit and go in again and widen it out a little bit. Alright, so I got our bigger bit now. I got all the holes started. We're going to go ahead with this bigger bit, and we're just going to work our way in there real nice and easy. And try to keep that from getting too far out to the edge there. I think we're going to be good here. Let's see what we got there. Yeah, it's not bad. I got to clean that flashing off the edge there. Just kind of work that out. Alright, that's better. And we'll go ahead and we'll hit the other side now. Alright, so now we got our holes all done up here for our marker lights. Sometimes you get these little pieces of the plastic from the shell like to hang on a little bit. Sometimes you could kind of knock them out with the drill bit itself, but other times you gotta get the knife and carefully try and pick them out a little bit. That's the tricky part here, because I don't want to destroy the paint on this, but I am going to be touching it up anyway, so it's not the end of the world if I mess that up a little bit. So the next part we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get all the backing pieces in for the lights. For all my lighting, what I do is I take and I drill everything out like I've done here, and I'll take some styrene, some sheet styrene, some of this thick stuff, and I'll basically cut a piece and put it on the back of it there. So basically it'll cover up the back side of the hole. I'll drill a hole through that to feed the wires through. That way the LED will sit between this and then what'll be the lens in the front, but it'll sit inside the shell. So it's kind of puts it back there. That's the easiest way I've come up to do it. And then as well, if you have a problem with an LED going bad or something, the only thing you're going to be goofing up is a piece of styrene on the inside that you're not going to see anyway. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start off. This is just a scrap piece I got laying around, nothing fancy here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my chisel blade here and I'm just going to cut off a piece here. Nothing too exact. I just like a decent sized piece, so when I use the plastic cement, it'll stay in there well. So a good bit bigger than the hole, but it doesn't have to be giant. Let's go ahead and get our cement here. I use the Scale Coat Pro Bond here, plastic welder. This stuff works pretty good. I've had a lot of luck with it. Now before I try and glue that in there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and clean all the flashing off the inside of the shell here, because you're going to have a little bit of that after you drill out the holes. So get in here and clean off that edge. Hopefully that'll show up a little bit. But now I'm going to take my plastic welder here and just really lay it in there, quite a bit in there. I'll take my piece that's going on at the spot there. I'll just go ahead and put that up in there. Hopefully you guys are seeing that. It's kind of hard to film and do this stuff, but I want to show everybody, you know, so if you guys want to try doing any of this at home, you guys can literally watch this and do it right alongside. So you put down a little bit of cement first, then you put the piece on, and you throw a little bit more on there, because this is one of those places where it really doesn't hurt to get a bit carried away with the cement stuff here. So we're going to go ahead and just throw that one in there, right over top of that spot, and press it down. You want to really press it down so that way it makes good contact and will hopefully stay in there pretty well. So I do that with the front and back. The only thing I don't do that with on these is the number boards. And the number boards, I'll show you that when we get to it, but for the headlights and the marker lights, I just do this method here with the sheet styrene and everything. So I'll go ahead and get the other ones all thrown in there, and then I'll get a few shots of that to show y'all. Alright, so I went ahead and I got the pieces back here in the back. You guys can see how that's laid out there. I've got one big piece up here, the top for the headlights, and I have separate ones down here in the bottom for the markers. This top one for the rear headlight here, this one's just a bigger piece, and all I did was when I cut it out, I just put a little slit in the middle of it, not all the way through, just a little bit of a way in, just to kind of score it. That way you could bend it in half, and then it fits right in the center line back here in the back side of the shell here. So that's kind of a little trick to doing that. Now I did run into a bit of a problem here at the front, and I'm hoping y'all be able to see this here, but on most of the Atlas shells I've worked on, there'll be the headlight and the number boards will be separated by plastic on each side of the headlight here. And normally that makes this pretty simple. You just put a plastic piece over the back part right about where the blade's at right now, and pretty much do it the same as the rest of the lights. But on this cheaper Trainman model here, they appear to have not done that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to have to build a box out of styrene in here to keep light from bleeding from the number boards over to the headlights. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have to cut out pieces of styrene to go in here. And really, there's no there's no great way about doing this. It's pretty much just eyeball it and get it as close as you can and just keep cutting and refitting things. So hopefully this won't take too long on here. If it does, I'll have to cut it out and just show you guys what it ends up looking like when it's done, or just showing pieces of it. But what I like to do is just get a good starting piece just to see what kind of size I'm working with. And that is too big, so I gotta thin that down a little bit. So all I'm gonna do is just take my chisel blade here. Oh, can you guys see that? Oh, that's hard to do on the camera. Alright, so I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my blade and just skim off a little bit off the edge here. Not too much. A little bit goes a long way, so we'll just take a little bit off. We'll try fitting it again here. There we go. Alright, so now what I'm going to do with this piece, I'm going to take and cut it in half, because I don't really need it to be as big as it is. But what this ends up giving me is this gives me the two sides to work with. And what we could do is we could just take our pieces here and double check them on the top to see how far they're going to stick out. So if you look at the top of the hood here, there's a seam right across there. That's actually how far back that's going to stick, and that's going to be a bit too long. I think the other is going to be the same, so I'll trim them down a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. That way they should hopefully fit halfway decent when we get them in here. And this is one of those things where it's not really crucial to be exact, because we're going to end up painting this black to keep the light from bleeding, but it's just one of those things that this is one of those parts where you could really get carried away with trying to make something perfect that doesn't really need to be exact. It just needs to be close. And we've got, yeah, that, I could trim that down a little bit more. Oop. Still got that. Let's trim off a little bit more now. Let me see if I can bring the camera back a little bit. And there we go. Okay, we're going to trim off just a little bit more of that. Oh, there we go. That ought to do it. There we go. Alright, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a little bit of my cement. And I'm just going to try and get it down in there as close as I can get it to where I want it. Because when I set this piece in, I kind of want it to sit right there. Let's see if it's going to sit there. Now, can I get that to show up? Okay, so there's our first sidewall of it here. And then what we'll do is we'll do the same thing with the opposite side, and then we'll make a cap piece to go over top of it. So I'm going to go ahead and get that other side piece fit in, and then I'll come back to you when I'm doing the cap here. Alright, so I've got both of those inside pieces now put together. I went ahead and I made our cap piece to go on the top here. So go ahead and throw a little styrene cement on there. Just get that good and coated there. I'm going to come in and just set this cap piece on the top. This is one of those spots to be a bit tricky, but it'll go on there. We'll get that on there nice like that. Press it down a little bit. And we're going to come in, we're just going to put some more cement on it. Because this is one of those phases when you can't really overdo it too much with this stuff. You want to get it on there pretty good. Because this stuff will kind of adhere all this together. And also, if your pieces aren't perfectly square, it'll kind of help seal it up a bit between this, and then we'll get a little heavy with the paint on here when we put it in here, and that'll kind of help keep any light bleed from occurring. But there's our light box in there. Hopefully, there we go. Get that all done up in there. So now, for our next part of this, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start. As you guys can see, I already did a test side here just to make sure I had the right method down to show y'all. We're going to have to remove this numbering from the side of here. Now, depending on the locomotive manufacturer, there's different ways you can go about doing this. With this being an Atlas Trainman, what I've found is Walther's Solvaset seems to be what takes these numbers off. I did try to let it just sit there and soak on it with a paper towel and tried to get it off with tape. But unfortunately, that didn't really seem to break these apart. On like a Rapido or a Scale Trains model, you can do that with a paper towel and some of the Solvaset and just letting it soak. But unfortunately, that didn't really work on this. So we're going to go with plan B when you're doing a project like this. And we're just going to take the old Q-tip here and we're just going to get to scrubbing. And basically, you just sit here and eventually the numbers will start to kind of disintegrate. So I'll go ahead and we're going to do this for a little bit here and see if we can't get these numbers to come right off. I don't know how long this is going to take, but just to show you guys, you know, I've said it probably 1,000 times already in this video, but the idea of this is that if any of you want to do this at home, you can do it. 110% y'all can build a locomotive that looks incredible with just a little time and effort. You don't have to have things perfect to have a good end result. You just got to get them close. That's the main thing, just getting things close. Yeah, it looks like those numbers are starting to come off here. Maybe not. Yep, yeah, they're got a little paint coming out. Don't panic when you start to see the paint coming off, because one thing I've noticed with the Solvaset is you'll get a little bit of blue coming off, but then that's normally when the numbers start coming off. So this can be a bit of a time-consuming process, just literally sitting here scrubbing on this, but it's better than trying to use a blade and scrape them off like I've seen other folks do. That I always end up with scratches and stuff in the paint. It just doesn't look good when I do it that way, so I tend to just stick with the old tried and true, longer but gooder way of doing this here. So let's go ahead and keep getting this apart. Yeah, there we go. Kind of see it's starting to come off right there, so I'm going to get a little bit more fresh Solvaset here out of the jug and flip to the other end of the Q-tip, and we're just going to keep working at it here. Alright, so instead of sitting here for 10 minutes trying to get this one spot off, I'm just going to show you right now. As you guys can tell, we're starting to get the numbers off. Every model's different. Everyone takes time. This is what you're going to end up with, just a nice cleaned up spot. You can see where I did have to scratch a little bit off with the knife because it was just right up next to this vent, and I just could not get that to come out. So had to get a little bit carried away there, but I think you all get the point with this here. It's just pretty much clean this off. So for the next part of this, what I'm going to have to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to start actually putting detail parts and adding things back to this. So this is going to be the end of part 1 of this. I'm not sure how long this is going to be, but it's probably going to be pretty long. And if you're still watching this, I really appreciate it, and I hope you tune into the rest of this here. If you have any questions, go ahead and comment them down below, and I'll do my best to answer them. I'm not the best at all the grammar and such and writing and stuff, so I apologize if the reply is not perfect, but I want to help anyone that wants to learn how to do this, and I really hope somebody watches this and wants to pick up a cheap model and try and build it on their own, because it's very, very rewarding to do this. So what we're going to go ahead and we're going to dive into first here, we're going to get these Canon fans installed here. We're going to get these, or at least get them started. We're not going to get them all the way installed today, but we're just going to get them started today. Get the bases glued in and get that squared away there. That way we can go ahead and let that dry while we work on a part that I forgot last video, unfortunately. Because, I don't always remember everything. I remember most things most of the time. So we actually have to cut the doors out on our cab. So we'll be doing that once we get these fans installed. So this is the one I used to test fit everything before. So I got to come in here and I got to trim this flashing off the edge. It's probably not going to show up very well, but I just want to very carefully cut the little nibs off the sides so that way we don't have that when we put that on there. Which we're all good there. Now, if you can see it, there's a little bit right there. Just very carefully. A, I don't want to cut my finger, and B, I don't want to break this, because if you guys can see that right there, we already kind of cracked it a little bit when we were doing our test fitting, but that's not the end of the world. We'll fix that up here. When we get this glued in, it's going to sit it's going to glue itself. It'll heal itself and be alright. So what I'm going to do, got my Scale Coat Pro Bond back out. I'm going to go ahead and start putting some of that around this inner lip here. And I just want to get a little bit around this top edge here. I'm going to set the fan in there. Hopefully get it to sit right where it needs to go here. I want to get it set in there before that glue really starts to take hold, but at the same time I want to try and get it sitting just right there, right where it's supposed to be. That's pretty good right there. I could live with that. So once you get it about good, you flip her over and you just get some in there from the back side to help really let it seat in there. This is where, when I mentioned about making the holes perfect and making sure you had a perfect circle, this is kind of why you can get away with not having them perfect. Because if you guys can see that, the only place we have any real bleeds over here on this side where my finger is right there. You can kind of see the hole through there. But other than that, we're good and we're sealed. So we can fill that in with a little bit of putty. But again, we weren't ripping our hair out when we were putting these in. That's kind of priority number one, is not getting crazy trying to make something perfect there. So we'll go ahead and we're going to let that sit there. We'll go ahead and we'll get the next two put in while we wait. Because then we're going to have to put the upper rings on these two as well while we're doing this. So I cut this out of the sprue here. Clean that edge off there. And we gotta clean out this little bit of flashing in the middle here. Let's go ahead and get this next one put in here. Now this one you could see we kind of boogered up around the edges a little bit more, but we'll putty it. No big deal. We can putty that out, and when we do the touch-up paint, you won't really even be able to see where that's all goobered up there. Go ahead and do our last one here. Alright, we'll go ahead and this last one put in here. Alright. Now this one's sealed up pretty nice. Get a little bit more on this side here. Try and get that to sit down a little better. Alright, so we'll go ahead and we're going to let our plastic weld dry on those back ones. We're going to move back up to this front one. And from looking at my photos, it looks like these fans seem to have the second ring on them. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to install that right now. Now, these rings can be a bit of a tough deal to do because they're very, very easy to break. And then too, they also have the flashing on them, which you got to try and get off, but you got to try not to break the ring while you're doing it. So a little bit of patience and a little bit of just getting her good enough is what you got to look for here. I don't want to break this ring, but I don't want to have too much a flashing or mess on here either. So get her about to here. This should work pretty good. I'm happy with that. If you guys can look close there, you can see where it's a bit deformed, a bit goofy. But it'll be all right. We don't need to rip our hair out on that. So now what I'm gonna do, take my shell, a little more cement. Just keep using the styrene cement. This stuff's awesome. We're gonna try and set this down right on top of it, which is gonna be a bit of a challenge, but just want to get it close, and then we can let it sit there. Normally, if you can kind of get one side started, you can go around and get the rest of it seated properly. It's just getting that first side to start a little bit's always kind of the tricky part there. But once that starts, the rest of it will sit down nice and easy. So there's that fan sitting there. And that looks about right. The prototype photos I found seem to make it look like this was a taller style fan, which doesn't seem correct based on some of the other models I've seen, but that seems to be what's on here, so that's what we're going with. That's what we're going to do. Some, especially on Conrail, I've noticed there's some units that'll have very, very tall fans, and there's some that'll have mixed in short, and they'll just be mix match depending on whatever, if the unit was in the shop, whatever the shop put on it before it left. Sometimes they got big ones, sometimes they got small ones. It's one of the things that it's a love-hate thing with Conrail. You know, there's so much variety and so many different things. It's really cool to be able to do it, but at the same time, it could be a bit frustrating because there's so many little different variations in every single thing you try to do. And, you know, two locomotives might look exactly the same, but there's a bunch of little differences to catch. So, this is just one thing I noticed at this one. So, we're going to go ahead and get those on there. Oh yeah, there we go. So this will have the bases of the fans done. I'm actually going to leave the tops off of the fans and the rest of it from assembling it until later on, until we get all of our wiring and everything installed. Then I'm going to do that later. I just want to get these bases put in here because this is where all your glue is going to be at. It's down here in the bottom, so. As you guys kind of tell here, what I'm doing is I'm taking a little bit of this styrene cement. I'm kind of blobbing it in my holes here. This will kind of help fill up some of that. Not all of it, obviously, but it'll kind of help fill in some of these edges where we might have a little bit of a seam showing through. Some of the spots where it's loose, this glue will kind of soak in there and melt the plastic some and fill it a bit. So that's kind of what we're currently going to do here. Because really, before I weather this, I'm probably going to end up coming through and repainting a lot of this top part. And then when we end up weathering it, it's all going to get pretty much rust colored anyway. So if the paint gets a little messed up on the top, that's really not a big deal. So we have that on there now. We're going to go ahead and we're going to let those dry. What we're going to do next is, I forgot in the first part of the video series here when I was doing all the disassembly work that I'm going to do open cab doors on this unit. And to do that, I've got cab doors from KV models here. That's just the EMD SD GP cab door set. These are what I use on every unit you see in a video that has an open door. I got the door from this KV models. They're really, really nice photo etched doors. But to do that, we got to remove our doors from our cab here. So, what we're going to end up doing here is we're going to take our blade. Again, this is my this is my used blade essentially. This is the one that isn't as sharp as a brand new one. It's a bit too dull to use on decals, but it's still pretty sharp. And when working with something like this, it comes in really handy because what we're going to do is we're going to score all the lines on this door to remove it. Very, very careful. You're just going to keep working that line in there. We're pretty much just going to score that until it'll come out, and that's how you get the door out. Now what's tricky is doing this line right here. Because it's so small, you could really easily go into the top corner of the cab. I've done that a boatload of times. Not the end of the world, but if somebody's really looking close to the model, they'll see where that happened, and I prefer not to do that. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to keep working this door edge, just keep scoring it a little bit. And then this close edge here, this one could be a real bugger because it's got the door hinges right there, and your blade's going to hit that and it's going to want to walk off the side. But we'll just keep working these edges, and we're going to keep scoring this until we can actually get it to pop out. Takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of effort, but it's a lot easier to go about it this way, at least in my opinion, versus taking and building a Canon and Company cab and then trying to get the paint to match and going through all that hassle versus just taking the cab I already know fits and using that for my build. So most of the way through here now. We're almost up here at the top. There we go. Now I got to work on scoring this part right here a bit more. Just keep working at it a little bit at a time. And keeping like a medium pressure. It's very easy to get a bit carried away here and give it too much pressure, and that's when you go through the side of the cab. And truth be told, I was kind of hoping I'd do that so you guys could see it on video, see me screwing that up, but I'm kind of trying to be careful too. Oop, got a little bit off there. And that's pretty common too. When you're working this edge here, you'll end up going into this door window. Seeing as we're not keeping that window anyway, it doesn't really matter, because this door is going to be junked. There's no saving the doors you cut out. They're pretty much just trash after that, but that's why we get the KV ones, because we'll glue those on later on down the line. We'll just paint them and we'll glue them in place. And we use them in that spots. So this can be a bit of a time-consuming part here. Especially when your window doesn't go the way you want it to. Just work that part out down there on the bottom. Alright, so we got like the bottom half off there now. Now we're going to have to clean up this edge a little bit here, which can be a bit tricky because, as you guys can tell, you're working on the side of the cab. So I want to try and get a flat edge to cut on that, but I don't want to cut towards me, but I need to hold that down. So this stuff can be a bit of a tricky part to do. Just take your time. Take your time, and again, take your time. So you keep working some of these edges off and flattening it out little by little. And what you gotta come back and touch up this whole edge anyway, so you don't gotta worry about taking any paint off. Now here again, this is gonna be our trouble spots right up here in this top corner. This is gonna be the real booger here, is getting this part out. Hopefully it'll go alright. It's still not loose enough yet. A lot of times another thing I'll do, which it'll look a bit dopey, but I take the old pliers here. Once I have it scored a good bit, I take them and I just kind of pinch down on it. Start trying to work that piece out. Like so. So it actually worked out pretty good there. So you can see there's our piece that came out, and that's after scoring it. Got a little flashing we gotta clean up, but that's, all in all, that's really not that bad. I have had far bigger messes doing this than that, doing cab doors, so go ahead and clean that off. We'll clean up this edge a little bit. And again, we'll come in, we'll repaint this a little bit later on down the project. Now, a lot of times you won't get this piece to stay here. A lot of times this comes right off. That's just kind of the way it goes. Of course, because I'm filming this, for some reason this piece actually stayed on, so consider yourself lucky if that piece stays. It's not really a big deal. The one thing to keep in mind when you're doing cab doors like this is that if you do the front door and the back door, you're going to have a hard time getting the cab to just sit and stay on there, because these nibs right here are what hold the cab on. So when you get rid of them, you tend to lose a little bit of that structuralness to it. So just kind of the way it goes. But that's, this is one of those things that I'm not sure a lot of people are going to want to do or not, but this is one of the things that I like to do, because I love open cab doors. I always think it kind of makes things just look a little bit more real, and I'm a big fan of that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this back door off screen, and I'll report back to you here. Alright, so I was working on the back cab door here, and about what I figured would happen happened, of course. I turned off the camera and was doing pretty good cutting the door out, and of course we got this piece come right off the back. It's kind of a bit more common on the back side of the cab. Kind of leave it up to you guys. If you want to take and get this little thin piece off and try and glue it back in place, have at it. But I'm not going to bother. Because that door is going to be open anyway. It's going to pretty much cover up where there's a piece missing at the top. So we're not going to worry about that too much. But that's getting our cab all ready to go there. So now our cab's going to be ready. We're not going to have to do anything else with that, at least right now, until we start putting the detail parts on. So we can go ahead and we could set that back off to the side, as well as our fan parts, because we're not going to need those right now. We're going to move on to another fun part here in our build. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start putting some detail parts on. So first thing that we're going to be adding here, first thing we're going to start with is our plows. We have these Details West PL 155. And this is what I call the Conrail plow right here. So I have two of these, one for the front, one for the back. Depending on the GP38-2 order specific Conrail units came from, some of them have these style on the front and a weed cutter style on the back. Some don't have them on the back. It seems to depend quite a bit. So first things first, we're going to go ahead, and if y'all remember back when we were working on our front here, I went ahead and I shaved off these little spots here from the MU cables. What I'm going to go ahead and do, this drill bit's a bit too big. I'm going to get a smaller bit. And I'm going to drill out a little hole to use for putting the Details West MU cables on there, because I have those to put on as well. But it's much easier to drill the hole when the plow's not on there when it's on there. So I'm just going to take and drill right down a little bit at the bottom of that spot. This is one of those doesn't have to be perfect moments right here. Just get a hole in there, just so that way when I go to put the MU cables in there, there's already a hole there. So we'll do that front and back, and then we'll go ahead and we'll start getting our plow placed correctly. Alright, so now we have our plow out of the box here. We do have a little bit of this metal flashing stuff in here. Drive me crazy. Now one thing you could do on these plows is there's little marks on the top where you can put grab irons on them. Myself personally, I generally don't on switchers at least, because it's just one more thing that's going to get knocked off. It's one more thing I'm going to knock the glue off of. I've just had a lot of bad luck with those popping off on these switcher units, so I'm going to go ahead and leave those off of this, just to avoid the hassle of it. Not to mention I've had issues too where when you drill through here, it'll kind of deform this top edge of the plow, and I really don't care for that. So what I want to do here, I'll go ahead and I'll kind of mock up where I'm going to end up putting this at and get a good idea of how it's going to sit on the front there. I generally like to try and keep them even with the bottom of the shell, just to kind of get a good idea there. So we're even. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take out my handy old acrylic red paint. And the reason I'm going to use this acrylic red paint, what I'm going to do, hopefully I'll get a little bit in the cap here. Of course that's not going to work today. I'll take a little bit of my red paint on my paint pile here. Oh, way too much, but that's why you buy it in bulk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this plow and these little points on the back here where it mounts, I just want to dip those in red paint. Now the reason I want to do that is what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my shell here. Hopefully this will show up decent on camera, because I'm going to try and do this from the camera here, but try and get it to sit about where I want it at and hold it in place. And what that's going to give me is that's going to give me spots where I got to drill at. Hopefully they'll be somewhat centered, but you know, hopefully. Alright, so those look decent. So if you look there, they aren't level. That figures. So what I'm going to have to do now is I'm going to have to take and kind of hold this up and see where they should be. Should they be a little bit higher? Should they be a little bit low? That to me looks like they should be on the lower side. Yeah, maybe lower side. Yeah. Alright. So this at least gives me a starting point to drill my plow holes. What I am going to do, I'm going to use a decent sized bit here. I don't want it to be exactly the same size as the plow, and the reason I do that is I like to have a little bit of wiggle room. That way if one side's not perfectly level or whatever have you, kind of gives me a little bit of room for adjustment. I'm not just stuck with the exact size, the exact spot holes I drilled. So go ahead and we'll go right over our paint spots, and we'll go ahead and we'll drill these out now. I want to say like right there at the top of that, there's a like cast in metal plate looking thing on the front of these shells. Normally right about centered on this little plate lip here is normally, is that going to focus? Normally like right about the center, that's where you want to drill your plow holes, at least that I can remember. So That's what we're going to go with here. And if I have to, I could always get a little bit bigger bit out and work the holes a little bit up or down, whatever way I need to get it perfect. Because when I glue this, I'm going to get glue all on this flat ledge. So these holes are more or less just kind of a guide. This flat surface where it's touching the front of the shell is what's actually going to hold it in place. So let's go ahead and let's get that on there. Let's see what we got. That looks a little bit on the high side. I kind of want to bring that down a little bit. Definitely got to come down a little bit on this side. I don't know if that's showing or not, but it's a little bit higher on this side. So what we're going to do, take our drill, and normally you just kind of work a little bit out of this lower side. Just kind of take and literally just pull the bit in and out, as stupid as that is. That'll kind of file us our space we need, and it'll kind of enlarge our hole a little bit there. And get it to where it'll sit a little bit lower. There we go. That's a little bit better. That's right about good there. I think I can live with that. Looks pretty centered. It should be sitting right about where it needs to. It could go a little bit lower. You guys can see that from the side. We're not sitting perfectly level. And we'll bring it down a little bit more, just to get that plow down there. It looks kind of funny when they're sitting a little bit too high off the tracks. So we're just going to keep working this down a little bit more here until we get it about where it's even on the bottom. And I know somebody's going to comment on it and say that Details West, they come with like a little mount, like paper in with the plow that has like a little mounting, like has the mounting holes and all that, and you can use that to do the front of these. But you know, that's just not the way I do things. You know, I'd kind of do the old trial by error and make it work whatever way I got to. So now you can see we're nice and we're pretty even here. We're not perfect, but we're pretty even. We're even enough I could live with it, that's for sure. That's pretty level, right about where I want it. So now, the fun part. We're going to go ahead and we're going to get our glue paper here. The reason I call it glue paper is because it's where I dump my CA glue out at when I glue things. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take and get a good gob of that good stuff out there. And now for the fun part. I'm going to try and get the CA glue on the back of the plow without getting it all over my fingers. Any of you that's done any model building know how that goes. Normally you end up with glue all over your fingers. That's just the way it happens. Now we're going to take our plow and we're going to throw it up on there. Oop, stuck to my finger. Uh-oh. Stuck to my finger and I dropped it. Alright, let's try this again. Got that on there. Just try to get it somewhat level and somewhat centered. Easiest way to tell if it's level or not is generally to flip it over. So you can use the bottom of the plow as kind of a guide to tell you normally about how level it is. Yeah, right about there ought to do it. And this is, what kind of CA glue is this here? I'll have to look here in a second. This stuff's pretty tacky. Normally it'll hold pretty quickly, but sometimes you gotta sit here and hold it for a little while. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of the beast. Yep, I'm not gonna want to do it. And of course, if you drilled your holes perfect, you wouldn't have to hold it, but what fun is that? If you do everything perfect every time, you don't have a good chance to learn something new. So, now we just gotta get that to sit there. The CA glue normally sets up in a couple minutes and it'll hold itself to where you don't have to sit here and hold it, but normally it's best to just hold it for a few minutes. That way it'll give it some time to build up. What kind of glue is this? This is, let's see if I can get that to come in here. Hobby Bond, thick. That's what this stuff is. Triple distilled, industrial grade. Ooh, fancy. I got this stuff pretty cheap on eBay. It just does the job. The thing I like about it is it gets pretty tacky after about 2-3 minutes to where it'll hold. And that's what we've got going on right here. See, now it's not moving now, so we can let that sit and dry now and not worry about it moving around. But what I will do is while I'm waiting for this to dry, I'm just going to let this shell sit here. I'm not going to go mess around with the back. I'm going to let this front end get good and dry before I try and do the back plow, because that is a mistake I've made before where I'll be waiting for this front plow to dry and I get excited and I start doing the back one, and next thing you know, that one in the front's all crooked because I was bumping into it while I was doing it. So we'll let this sit here, and we'll dive back into this project a little bit later. Alright, our glue's dried now on our plow on the front there. It's not going nowhere, stuck on there good. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to start, we're going to go ahead and get our back plow prepared here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same deal as we did in the front. We're going to mark it off with a little bit of red paint on the tip of the plow there. And then we'll drill the holes out and test fit it, and then we'll use the CA glue to hold it in place, and we'll have to let that dry for a little bit as we did with the first here. Let's see if we have any better luck with our red paint this time. So you just kind of get that red paint there in the tip, and you should be able to just get a little bit on the end of it. There we go. Oh, like so there. Alright, so we got that on there. Let's go ahead and try and get this marked off decent here. Gonna try to eyeball it here. Oop. Alright, let's go ahead and see right about there. Should be about where we need it right there. If not, we can always work it out a little bit with our holes. So let's go ahead and... Ooh, got a bit of a bad mark there. Alright, let's go ahead and see what we got with our drill holes now. It kind of looks a little bit off. Let me check that there. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll move that over just a little bit. So this is kind of the thing, guys. You got to kind of eyeball things and see how that really lines up, because sometimes it doesn't line up exactly how you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a little bit to this side of that mark and a little bit to this side. That should put me right about where I want to be with this. One other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at the front here and see about where the hole ended up at. Okay. Looks like it's about midway. Let's go ahead and let's drill that out. In theory, the way these plows are kind of set up, those little tabs that stick out the back, they should be about the same distance to each side of this. But I have noticed some of these plows, they come in, they're a little bit bent, so sometimes you got to kind of eyeball it some too. Oh, and that's right on the money. That's right where I want it. They're nice and centered and even. Oh, you guys saw it here, right here. Occasionally you get it perfect. It doesn't happen very often, but occasionally it does go on there right the first time. So let's go ahead and let's get a little CA glue here. Find something to spill that out on. Oh, it doesn't look like I got anything. I'll just take and put a little bit right on the end here. Get that down there on the sides, on the end. Get that on there. I don't know about you guys, but it always seems like these CA glue bottles always seem to, the caps end up getting filled up with glue even when you clean the end off of it, so sometimes you end up losing your cap after a while. Just take and press that down there. And that should be good to dry now, so we're going to take this and we're going to set it off to the side. And while we wait for this to dry, we're going to go ahead and we're going to dive into a little bit of stuff here on our motor and drive assembly here. We haven't messed with in a while. Let's go ahead and let's do a little bit on that. So this particular unit has a speed recorder cable on, I believe, the conductor side truck. I just got to look at my prototype photo on the front axle of the conductor side truck. And the type it is pretty much your standard EMD style one, pretty much what was on everything back then. So Details West SR284. So this is what we're going to be using. Go ahead and these come in 2-packs. I only need one, but for the purposes of the video, I grabbed a fresh 2-pack so I could give you guys the number on that and then tell you what exactly I'm using. So what I do for these is I pretty much take, and you have your little raised casting here. I pretty much just drill right in the center of that to make a hole so that way the speed recorder can sit right in there. It could be a bit difficult to drill out these truck side frames, but you just gotta keep working at it and you'll drill right through it. You gotta kind of like hold the side frame of the truck as you're drilling on it, because it's not going to want to. What I like to do is I like to drill out the hole some first, and then I'll come in with the chisel blade and just kind of scrape some of that top off there so it'll sit flush. Yep, we went all the way through. Alright, so we got that hole drilled all the way through. Let's see if we can get that up and on there. So we got a hole through there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our chisel blade here. We're just going to very carefully get like this top layer off. It can be a bit of a booger to do that sometimes, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I just like to get this flattened down a little bit. Kind of give me a little bit more room to put the end in there. And once you do that, I normally like to take the bit and just kind of work this hole out a little bit more. That way I'm not fighting to get that cable to sit there. That looks pretty good. I can live with that. So the next thing we gotta do is we gotta get our cable off of its mount here from Details West. A simple pair of trimmers will do the job for that. Pull the end off here. And then we got to cut this back part off. I like to leave a little bit, but not too much. That way it has something to go in there, but not so much that it's going to stick through and bind up the truck. Now next, it's always good to test fit this type of stuff. That way you make sure you got your hole big enough to... Oh yeah, we're right on the money there. Oh, good deal. Good deal. It's going to sit right in there. So now we go back to our trusty CA glue. Where did that... Here we go. Go ahead and use this packaging from the speed recorder here to get a little glue on it. We don't want a lot of glue, but we want a little bit of glue on this. And we'll keep that glue out for what we're going to be messing with next here. So what we're going to do is going to take the back side and just dab it in the glue a little bit. I don't want too much, but I want to get some on the back so it'll stick. Got that on there, and we just kind of set it down in there. About something like that. I know how to do it. And depending on the locomotive, some of these will curve back and go up and on, and some will go straight up, and there's all sorts of different ways. Check with your prototype photos, get an idea what you want. This is kind of what I like to go with, just up and over, and then have it curled up over the top of the truck side there, like it's going down behind there. So now we can let that dry. Our next pieces we will be messing with here are our fuel tank pieces here. Now, these, this is the replacement fuel tank I got for this. I got this from Atlas. I think I mentioned this earlier in the video series, I believe. But you can get these from Atlas, from their parts department. If you go to their parts website, you can order these. So that way, if you get a big fuel tank like this and you need the smaller one, you could order them. The only downfall is they don't come with the air tanks or the little what the heck there, the fuel filler neck. Yeah. So you got to take and rob what you need off of one to put it on the other. So what we got here, what we're going to do, we're going to find something to put a little bit of glue on there. Something preferably that I don't care if it gets dirty here. We'll use a Q-tip because I always got a boatload of those around. Let's take and put a little bit of glue on these edges here, like so. And then we'll go ahead and put our piece on here. Just lining up the two backside parts there, and she should pop right in, yep. Because the one awesome thing about Atlas is a lot of their stuff's interchangeable, so you can get away with doing that. Now next we're going to get this little fuel filler neck off of here. Now when you're pulling a part off like this, you kind of want to keep your finger above it to keep it from going flying. That tends to happen a lot. But we got that off of there. We're going to go back over to our glue pad and get a little glue on the end of it. Go ahead and pop that in. Hopefully it'll go in without going flying. Or hopefully it'll go in period. Sometimes these little detail parts can be real booger sometimes, you know. I think that just popped in there. I hope. Oh yeah, that went in there. Alright, so now our fuel tank's a little bit more ready. We'll go ahead and do the other side real quick and get that done. And then we could get this installed on the body and be one step closer, at least in that regard. Hopefully by the time we finish up with this little segment here, we'll be able to get back to doing some more work on the shell. But we just got to see how that plow's drying. Sometimes this glue will really harden up quick. Sometimes it'll take a little bit more time. So I don't want to rush it if I don't have to. And for those of you watching this, I think I'm like 2 months into filming this already. So we're not going to rush anything on this here. I want to put out something good for you guys that be informative, if anything, and y'all can maybe pick up a thing or two. Hopefully maybe one or two of you will build one of these and use this as kind of a road map, if you will. Alright, that's on there. Alright, so now we have an extra fuel tank for the parts drawer. Got a boatload of these sitting around. Remember which drawer that goes in. It's this one. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take and reinstall our fuel tank here. Should go something like that. So now we have our 2,600 gallon fuel tank on there as opposed to the 3,600 gallon one. So that leaves us pretty much well ready to go with our motor and drive assembly. We won't really need to do anything with this until we start doing all of our DCC and lighting work. So we can go ahead and set that back off to the side. Let's check in our plow here. I'm pretty sure we're, yeah, that glue's hardening up pretty good. We can keep working. So, let's see what we want to mess with next. One of the next things, if I have it pulled out and sitting over here, should be our cab signal box. We'll go ahead and get that on there. I do not have one, so let me get a cab signal box here. Alright, so for the cab signal box on these, I actually got these from Shapeways a few years ago. They were really cheap. You could order them in bulk. But it's just a plain old cab signal box, nothing fancy. So the bottom sides of these is hollow. One thing I do recommend is, of course, to have your prototype photo handy, so that way you could see exactly the positioning on the front of the locomotive. Some of them are a little bit farther back, some of them are a little bit farther forward. And you gotta kind of eyeball where it's supposed to be sitting at. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to get a little bit of glue on the bottom of this. Hopefully that'll be enough to hold it. You don't need too much, but these do like to come loose because they are 3D printed. It looks like that's about it right there. Now this will take a little bit of time for the glue to really sink its teeth in on this here. Oh, come on. Right there. That's where we want it at. And that's just going off of the photo. It's not all the way back, but it's not all the way forward either. It's kind of centered, but it's not centered, and it's very Conrail. Very, very Conrail. So that should do that. Let's see what we can mess with next here. We can go ahead and we could start putting our air lines on. Well, you know what? While we let that dry, let's go ahead and get our horn installed on the top of the cab. I believe we're going to need to do that here. So we'll let that sit for a few more minutes and dry. Go ahead and get our horn out. Where did that go? That's ditch lights. There's the horn. Alright, so for my horn here, we got an AH190. It's an air horn 190. So this is a Leslie RS3L. This is pretty much your standard issue Conrail horn they put on everything. So go ahead and get that out of there. Probably gonna need a little bit more glue for this, but now the first thing we're gonna have to do here is we're gonna have to drill out this hole in the top of the cab a little bit more to fit the base of this horn on here. Let's drill it out a little bit. Don't need to get too carried away. I need a little bit more glue for this too. Let's get some more glue. Alright, so for these horns, this is another point where you can do it your way. This is simply the way I go about it. So they give you this big long base here to really get the horn stuck in there. The problem with that is, if you do it that way, if you guys can see there, it'll actually block or be in the way of your top headlight. So what I generally do is I try to cut down this base so that it will be sticking in there, but it won't be sticking in there too far, and that could kind of be a bit tricky, but generally just get it most of the way short enough. Most of the way short enough that it's not going to be a pain. So that's not going to leave us much for our connection there, but that should be enough to hold it. It's just, you know, it is a model. We're going to have to be careful with it. We're not going to be able to throw this thing around like crazy. So you can go ahead and got a little glue on that tip there. Now we just got to get it to sit there and stick. About like so. Now this is one of those things you gotta kind of babysit a little bit until that glue sets up. And really just kind of keep an eye on it so it doesn't keep tilting forward, because that's what it's going to want to do. You probably could make the hole the exact perfect size, would probably be the best way. But, you know, then you run into trying to get the thing to sit in there and it doesn't want to go in there, so it could kind of be a bigger pain to do it that way. So for our next piece for the cab here that we're going to go ahead and do is we're actually going to put the little Sinclair antenna on the top. Let me see if I can get that where you guys can kind of see it here. See if I get that to focus. There it is. So that's going to be our next piece we're going to put on the roof. And once again, we will refer to our prototype photo to see exactly about where it should be. And we're just going to get it close. Most of these, if my memory serves, were about middle of the cab back, but I'm not 100% sure. I gotta look at the pic. I gotta actually refer to the photo myself. But I'm pretty sure they're about the middle of the cab towards the rear. So that's what we're gonna go with here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna trim this flush, or at least try to get it as flush as I can. It's pretty flush. Not perfect, but enough for what we're doing. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a little drill bit. This is kind of important to use the right drill bit size on, or use close to it. Reason being is these aren't very wide in the first place, and I don't want to use a bigger bit than I have to here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drill a little hole about there. That looks, it looks about right. Throw that in there. Then we're going to have to get a little glue on the bottom of this too, without getting glue on the pliers. So now, in theory, that little nub sticking out on the bottom should sit in that hole. In theory. Does it want to go in there? Yeah, it looks like that's not wanting to sit down in there. There we go. Alright, so there's one of our antennas. We still have to do the smaller one for the end of train yet. Let me grab one of those. And this will be the same process as the first one, just with a smaller antenna here. So now these generally went right about back in here. Generally they were right towards the front, but I don't like to drill too much into the number board housing if I don't have to. So I kind of like to be back a little bit. It'll be close enough that it'll get the job done. So with these small guys here, same deal as before. We're just going to trim it close, but leave a little bit on the bottom. I think that I'm going to get a little bit bigger bit here. Not a lot bigger, because I don't want to leave a hole there, but I want a little bit bigger of a bit. And when you're dealing with these small parts like this, it's kind of hard to tell what's too big and what's not. So go ahead and go with this one. We'll just widen this out just a little bit. Not too much. There we go. Now for the fun part. Where'd that little thing go? So these are just so tiny. They're a bit of a pain. So just barely get that with the tweezers there. Get a little bit more glue. Now try to get this down in there. Right there. Oh, come on. Sit down in there. There we go. Alright, so that at least has our cab roof prepared for our next step, which we'll have to drill out our holes for our headlight there for our wiring for the LEDs, but we're going to let all this kind of sit and dry up a little bit here. I don't believe, I better check here, don't believe this one had sunshades on the cab, this particular unit anyway. It did have, well, had one on the engine. Yeah, it did. Okay. This one appears to have a sunshade on the engineer's side of the cab, so we'll go ahead and grab one of those too here. Now the sunshades that I use are actually a Canon & Company part here. They're literally just called EMD cab sunshades, so nice and easy to find if you want to find them. I just want to kind of trim up that little nub there. If you want to be real fancy, you could file that, but with how thin this is, it'd be a bit of a challenge. So another thing too, I believe I'm going to do on this is I want to have the cab window open on this cab, at least on the engineer's side. So what we're going to go ahead and do, we're going to cut out the center of our cab window with our pliers. So we're going to have this window be open. Now, if you really wanted to be fancy, you could go in there and trim out that whole edge in there. But the problem you run into doing that is a lot of times you won't get it perfectly flat and even, and it'll end up kind of looking bad. So myself personally, it's very, very difficult to see that little tiny lip in there. So I just leave it, and normally nobody seems to notice. So we're just going to leave that be. Now for the sunshade, same process as everything else. Just get a little CA glue, get along the edge. Oh yeah, we got a little on there. And then just take and carefully place it right in that little seam there. Oh, come on. There we go. That's a little bit better. There are companies that make little photo etched ones that you could drill holes and mount that way. Myself personally, I like these Canon ones just because I don't have to drill any holes. And normally something like this, if it's going to get broken off, it's going to get broken off. You're going to have to end up gluing it back on anyway. So might as well just stick with something that we're gluing on in the first place and, you know, go with that. So making some good progress here, guys. So we got that all squared away. Next, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start doing, I think we'll probably do some of the pilot details, and then maybe just start diving into, well, actually, we'll do the pilot details. We'll get the ditch lights eyeballed out and the holes drilled for them. And then we'll start doing all our grab irons last before we start doing the lighting work. So that'll be in the next little bit here that I film. Alright, so in our last snippet of this, we went ahead and we got our front and rear plows on. I think I mentioned next we were going to kind of dive into some detail work on the front and the rear. There's one thing I kind of forgot about, of course, as usual with this project. We need to drill our holes and start getting some little stuff ready with this here. We need to drill all of our holes for our lights. If you remember earlier, we put these pieces of sheet styrene over all of our holes we're going to be putting our lights in. So what we're going to go ahead and do here is we're going to drill those holes now so that we can feed our LED wires through, but the holes will be small enough that the wires can get through, but the LED itself can't get through. So I got my small drill bit out again. Now the trick with doing these is you want to keep some pressure on that piece of styrene on the back, so that way you don't drill through it, but you also don't want to stab your finger with the drill bit when you're going through there. That can kind of hurt a little bit. So you got to kind of watch it a little bit. You want to use a sharp bit, but not too sharp. So we got one hole in there now, and that might come through there if we can get that light to shine through it. But there's one hole in there. I just got to drill our other one. Basically, I go through and do this for the headlights, the marker lights, and then we aren't to the ditch lights yet, but we'll be doing a similar process with the ditch lights as well when we get to it. So I'll film that when I'm doing like the mounting up for the ditch lights, getting the holes all drilled for those. I also put styrene on the back side of those to keep the bulbs from going through. So I'll go ahead and I'll get these holes drilled out, and then I'll bring you back for we're going to do a little painting on the inside of the cab and some spots to kind of help keep light from bleeding, and then also kind of add a little bit of detail to it. So I'll bring you guys back for that here in a minute. Alright, so we got all the holes drilled now for all the different lights here, the headlights and the marker lights. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to throw a little paint on the inside of our cab, just to kind of give it a little, since we're going to have the doors open, just kind of make it appear a little bit more detailed, even though it's not, but just kind of give it a little bit extra, so that way if you kind of look from the sides, it'll kind of make the cab brighter a little bit and kind of make it easier to see in. As far as the cab color goes, it's kind of, finding the right color can be a bit difficult. I've seen gray, I've seen like a mint green color on some units. There's all sorts of different colors. What I've found to go with is just, this is from Badger Model. This is Badger Model Flex Paint. It's mud color. This is also what I use for weathering for like sand colored stuff. But it's just kind of a tannish kind of deal, so it kind of works out really nice. But kind of get in there, and I just want to paint the inside of the walls mainly is what I'm after here, so that way when you look in those doors you could kind of see a different color than what's on just the regular blue. The only downfall of this Badger paint is it's kind of a bit too watered down for doing just brushing it on. It tends to kind of flow around a little bit, so you gotta be careful not to let it get onto the outside of your shell. But Still got to try and get good coverage on everything too. I just kind of get it in there everywhere. And it's falling right on down there in the front. Get like this back sides of these windows and such and all that in there. Alright, so that kind of gives you guys an idea of what I'm going for there. It's mainly, got a little bit on the sides there to get that off. The only plus side of this paint is it is an acrylic paint, so you can just kind of wipe it off normally pretty easily. It doesn't really stick to much anything, so just kind of get in there and clean that up with a Q-tip. I got a little bit on my finger. That's why it's going on everything. I see what's going on here. Not the end of the world. This is going to get weathered anyway, so just try to get most of that junk out of there that's coming through the windows there. But either or, there's the idea of it there, is that when we're looking at it in from the side, you can kind of see where it's a different color inside the cab. So the other thing we'll have too is our doors. These are our cab doors we're going to be using. These are from KV models, just the EMD, SD, GP cab doors. I like these. They're nice and photo etched. They're really thin. I'm also going to paint the back sides of these as well while I have this paint out. I'll worry about painting the blue on the front when I do all the blue paint on the shell, but this I can just kind of throw it on there. I don't have to be too careful with this because we're going to paint blue on the other side yet, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Just get it on there and get a good coat on there. Obviously, you got to make sure you're painting the inside and not the front. We'll wipe some of this excess off. Alright, so we got our cab doors painted too now. Next up, I gotta figure out, I think we got, you know what, we still got to putty in around the fans yet with a little bit of putty to fill in where our holes were a bit too big for us there. So we'll dive into that here next. Hopefully that should go pretty simply. Now for the putty I'm using here, what in the heck is this stuff called? Squatron Products Fast Drying Formula. Just a hobby, it's the perfect hobby filler. Okay. Well, if you guys are looking for it, this is the stuff I use. I don't know too much about these putties and stuff. I don't really use them a lot, but on an occasion, you do need them. So what I'll do normally is I get my spare piece of cardboard that I keep laying around for glue or whatever have you. I'll take and I'll put a little bit down on that. And then we'll get our chisel blade back out. Generally want to use a kind of used up one that's not really perfect anymore because we don't need this to be sharp. We just need it to help fill these holes. And we get just a little bit there on the back side of the blade, and what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of work it in this spot up here. It should hopefully just kind of sit down in that hole. We're just going to try and scrape it off of the outside of it down into that seam there. And hopefully fill that in fairly decently. This is one of those things you always think, oh, this is going to be great, it's going to be easy, it's going to be good, and sometimes you'll be sitting here forever and a day trying to fight to get the stuff in there right, but you guys just keep playing with it. We don't need it to be perfectly smooth or anything. We just need it to fill in the holes for now, and we could always come back and clean that up a little bit with a good chisel blade later on. But the main thing, I just don't want to see a bunch of light coming through there. You can see there's a few spots where it looks like there's a hole. We got a little bit of one by the dynamic brake fan here. We'll have to get that real quick too. Just get right down there on that edge. Just cover that up. I think that ought to do it, right? Oh, nope, I got another one back over here. A little bit back on this side now. Let's get a little more putty. We'll just kind of ease it on down in that spot. And what you can do is you take and wipe off the excess off your blade and then come back in and just try and scrape it as smooth as you can. A lot of times you'll get it pretty close to good. It won't be perfect, but good enough that when it dries, it should be pretty easy to clean up the rest of the way to get it how we want it, to make it to where it's not going to be apparent that we botched the holes up really bad. So that's just kind of there we go. All right, so there's what we got for that. That's going to be sitting there waiting now. So we'll let that, we're going to let those parts dry there. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start on, I think we're going to put our MU hoses on from Details West next. And then we'll also do our coupler cut levers, because those are not very fun. Those can be a bit of a good challenge to do, but we'll get it done. So let me get everything set up for that, and I'll start filming when I get into that there. All right, so I got everything set up now. At least to do the front coupler lift bar, those tend to be a bit of a pain in the rear end, so do the rear ones, but they just always tend to fight me, so you guys will get to see that live, and then when you try to do it on your own, you also get to fight it. So before we get into that, though, we're going to go ahead and we're going to mess with our Details West MU cables here. It's MU266, 3 cluster sets here. We're going to go ahead and get those pulled open. We're going to go ahead and get those installed on the front. Now when you're doing these, there is a left and a right. As you can see, there's one MU cable towards the middle that's a little bit longer, so you want to make sure you pay attention to which one's supposed to go where. But you just take and break them off. And what I like to do is I kind of take them and kind of bend them a little bit, so they got like a little bit of an S seal, because they have to go up through the plow and glue up to the front side there. So all I do is I take and you guys can see that there's a little there's like a little nub there where that's going to sit in a hole on the front, provided I drilled it in the right spot, which I don't know if I did or not. We'll find out here though. So once we have them bent, we just kind of get a little CA glue on that back side there. We're going to take and fish it on up in there like so. And sometimes you'll get lucky and they'll fit right where they're supposed to. Other times they will not want to do that. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take and try and get that nib pushed in there like that. Try to press down at the top and bottom, get them to sit nice and flat. As you guys can see, they're a little bit off angle there, but I can live with that. That's not the end of the world. So we'll just do the same thing with the other side one. Give it that little S bend to it. Again, just giving it a little bit of that deal. We'll take it and get some CA glue on that end again. We'll just fish her on up in there. Hopefully get it to go where it's supposed to go. This is where your tweezers come in kind of handy here, because you can kind of fish them around a little better than what you can with your fingers. Yep. That's not going to want to sit in there. Okay, got that in there. Yeah, these ones are going to be a little bit more crooked than the other side, but we're going to live with that. That's not really a huge deal. So there we go. There they are on the front. I'll go ahead and throw the ones on the back and we'll dive into that cut lever. Alright, so there they are on the back. We got them all up on there, glued in place, held on. Now it's time for one of my least favorite parts of a detailing project, doing these front coupler cut levers. And the reason for this, hopefully I get to pick it up on camera here, but so with these EMD style deals, you've got these ends on them here. So you have to get all these little hook rings on first. Then you have to try and get the little hook rings into the shell. And that could be a real pain in the butt. So my general mode of attack when doing these, and what I like to do, let's see if I get some better light on that there, is I try to get a little bit of CA glue. I'll get a little bit on the end of my toothpick, and then I try to kind of dab it in these holes that we drilled for our cut lever. That way, hopefully, in theory, when I need to get the little rings into their spot, they'll kind of hit that glue and stick there. Now, as to whether that works or not, that's a whole nother matter. But that's what I normally try to do. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. This is just one of those projects. I wish I had a trick for you guys on how to do this, but I really don't. This is normally I try not to use. This is normally why I kind of not necessarily start off with a better model than one of these Trainmans, but I'll start off with like an Atlas Master that already has the cut levers on it, and like the grab irons and such, so that way I don't gotta mess around with this stuff. But occasionally it's just kind of the option we've got to take. So we're gonna go ahead and hopefully I'll be able to get this filmed and do this at the same time. What I'm gonna do is I got my cut lever kind of sitting where it's supposed to be. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start trying to get these lined up to where they're supposed to go. Oh, you know what? The end of that cut lever might not let me do it because it's pushed in a little bit. Okay, well, we're gonna clip that off then. I forgot about that. I haven't put one of these on an EMD in a while, so let's get our clippers here. Because I forgot these don't like to sit close enough to the shell to work right. So we got to cut these little ends off if they want to come off of it. There we go. I cut it off of both sides so that way I could actually get to sit in there, because that little piece doesn't fit behind the plow. It won't sit flat enough. So, okay, now let's give that another go here. Now we should be in a little bit better spot. Alright, where is my tweezers? Just kind of get them down there. If I can get one started, normally that's, you get one going, you could start getting the rest of them. It's just trying to get that first one going is a real booger. Because you're trying to... Okay, there... Oh, almost had it. I wonder if I hold this... No, that's not going to help any. Maybe if you guys got a trick to doing this, leave it in the comments below, because I could definitely use a trick to get these on without fighting with them. I've thought about trying to glue the rings to the cut lever, but that always seems like, well, if I do that, then I'm kind of stuck with, you know, where they're at, and it's kind of hard to tell where they're at, where they should be at versus where they're actually going to be. If what am I trying to say? Where they should be at on the cut lever versus where the holes are at on the shell, so to speak. So let's see if we can get this second one started. We got the first one in there, so that's always good. Come on, second one. Come on. I apologize for the terrible filming that you're probably going to be seeing right during this part here, but I mean, this is kind of one of those, I gotta try and look more at what I'm doing than what the camera's picking up. It's kind of hard to do something like this through the camera, so you guys will have to bear with me. I got the first two in. I don't know if that's going to show up or not, but the first two are in. That comes back to why I was using the glue to just kind of get it in the holes. That way, if I could get the end of this ring deal in the hole, it'll kind of start picking up. Man, maybe I should do it upside down. Maybe that would help. Oh yeah, that'll give you... Oh, now you guys can actually see what I'm doing. There we go. Okay, so we got one more to do now. That's going to be this far end one. Oh boy. Alright, where is that one? That's got to go right in there. Okay. Wonder if we can push that down there. Oh, nope, too far, too far. Alright, let me get this last one in. I'll come back to you guys once it's already in there and show you. Alright, so I turn the camera off and I get it in a spot where I can see it a little bit better, and pretty much immediately after I got that in there now. So that is, all the little rings are now in the holes where they're supposed to be at. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take a little bit more glue and dab it down on each of those rings and those spots, because I really want to make sure that stuff's glued in there, because that was a pain in the rear to get those in there, and I really don't want to have to do that again. So we're going to get those well glued in there. This is one of them situations where, you know, a little extra CA glue ain't going to hurt anything. So we're going to come back and paint over all this this area anyhow, so don't got to worry about being generous with the CA glue, I guess is the best way to put that. So, alright, we have our cut lever in place. And sorry guys, I don't have a good way of doing that, but that's probably one of the hardest, honestly, that's probably one of the hardest parts of the whole project, is getting those in there, just because you have those four little deals there that you got to try and line up and you can't see them. Like, you can't, like, see to get them in where they're supposed to be. It's oh yeah, it's not a good time, guys. So let me go ahead and get the back one on, and then maybe we'll throw some well, you know what? Maybe we'll throw some grab irons and lift rings on this thing next. We're starting to get somewhere. All right, now that we have our cut levers installed, I've let them dry for a little bit. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna do our ditch light mounting next. We're gonna at least get the holes and everything drilled for them. These are what I'm using on this here Details West DL229 ditch lights with lenses, pilot end mount. These seem to be pretty common on Conrail because they went under the front of it, like kind of went down the underneath the anti-climber on most of these units. So what I do with these is normally I take and I cut this apart, so that way I could have the separated ditch lights here, about like so. So that way we can mock them up to get our holes marked out correctly. This is a similar process to what I do with the plows, where I take and I dip the end of where I need to drill a hole in some red paint, and then I just kind of hold it up there and get it about where it needs to be. Now, one thing I'm noticing right now is this ditch light's not going to want to sit where I want it at here. So one of the issues you run into with these Details West castings, because I think I'm not sure how they're designed to fit in there, but what I run into a lot is this top edge that sticks up here can get in the way, and it won't want to fit underneath the pilot. You'll have the ditch lights hanging way too low. So a lot of times what I end up having to do is take these cutters and cut it down a little bit. Sometimes it's best just to cut the whole dang thing off, which is what we're going to do here. So kind of eliminate that. That way it'll be a lot easier to get that to sit flush up underneath it. At least have to do that with these front ones, not with the rear ones so much, because the rear ones will be, there isn't an anti-climber on the rear of these locomotives, so we just got to do this with the front ones, and then when we go to assemble too, that'll tell us which ones we had planned for the front and which ones we had the rear. Not that it's really all that crucial, but if you like to keep your parts straight in order, that's one little thing you can use there to keep track of everything. So now that we've got that all squared away, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to pretty much get this about where we want it, and we'll touch that paint down. So that way we know where to drill our hole for, let's see, there might be showing up a little bit there. So that way we know where to drill our hole to mount these at. And what I like to do is I'll drill one hole, I'll drill the hole where it's going to be mounted at first, and then normally I drill a second hole a little bit next to that, so that way I have a place to feed the wires through. And see, that one kind of marked a little bit higher than I want, but I'll fix that when I drill it. So got our drill bit. Let me go ahead and get this drilled, and I'll come back to you guys once I get the holes all drilled out here so I can kind of mock it up and show you. Alright, so there we have our ditch lights just roughly test fit. You can see they look pretty good. We'll have to tighten them up a little bit when we glue them in place, but those holes are right about the size they needed to be. And then, as I mentioned, what I try to do is drill an extra set of holes just for, let me see if I can get that to show up there, for the wires to run through. So now we have that all set and square to go. The one other thing I like to do with these ditch lights is I like to take and glue a styrene, like a piece of scrap styrene, to the back of them to keep the LEDs from slipping through them. I found with these Details West castings, they're all a little bit different. Let me see if I get to show up here. And some of them, this little hole in there ends up being big enough for an LED to fit through. So what I do is I just take a little piece of scrap styrene. Let me see if I get that to show up there. I take a very small drill bit here, and I just drill a hole through it. And what I'll do is I'll cut this down so that it'll fit on the back side of the ditch light housing. And then I'll just use a little CA glue to attach it. And that'll just basically keep the LED, it'll allow me to feed the wires through the ditch light, and then it'll keep the LED itself from being able to slide through and go behind, because that's not a fun time. I don't like, that can be pretty frustrating. So we'll go ahead and cut out these now. Hope that's showing up on the camera. It's probably not, but go ahead and... These don't need to be very big pieces, just big enough to stick on the back of here. And the reason I pre-drill these as opposed to gluing the styrene on first is sometimes the CA glue will hold things really well, and sometimes it doesn't. I've noticed with these castings, they'll hold, but it's not extremely strong. So it's best to drill a hole like this first. Worst case, I get a little glue on it. You could drill through the glue easier than you could drill through the styrene. So all I gotta do is get a little glue and put it on the back side of that there ditch light. Let's see, where'd that go? Let's do a quick demonstrational one here, if I can get that to show up. Come on, focus. There we go. Alright, so we take a little bit of our CA glue, if I can get some on my toothpick here, and we're just going to put it on the back side of that, nice, and we get it on there pretty good. We'll be generous with it. And a little trick here, you can take your toothpick and use that to pick up your piece of styrene, and you take the end that doesn't have the glue on it and kind of use that to put it in place there. But all that's there for is just to keep the LED from sliding through there. But again, that's just something that saves you a lot of hassle later on. So we're going to do this with all 4 ditch lights, and once that's completed there, I'll go ahead and bring y'all back, and we'll go ahead and start on the actual detailing of this unit. All of the grab irons, the lift rings, all that fun jazz. Alright, we got our ditch light housings all prepared. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to start installing grab irons. So what I generally use is from Trainman Group, the 18-inch drop type grab irons here. I think it's a 3015 is the part number. I buy the like 100, 200 bag of them or whatever, the bulk pack of them, because you go through a lot of these when you're doing detail projects. But what I like to do with these is, since all these models I build have sound and running wires all over the place and everything, I like to trim down these grab irons a little bit so they don't stick so far in, because you'll end up poking yourself in the finger and it's not a good time. So what I generally do is I'll take my blade and I'll kind of cut this about in half, And normally that's plenty adequate to be able to use to get the grab iron in there. So once we got that trimmed down, we'll go ahead and retake, and we get a little glue on each end. If I can find the glue, where's the glue? There's the glue. We just take and go ahead and put these right in the holes we drilled earlier on in this series. Just kind of get it to sit fairly flat. Now the tricky thing here is since I drilled the holes a little bit on the bigger side, it can be a bit of a pain to get these to sit evenly. But the nice thing about this CA glue I'm using is it's a very thick blend, so it'll set up and it'll A, kind of help fill in the excess holes, and B, it'll kind of keep the grab irons from moving around quite a bit. So this is basically the same process all the way around. I got these two here on the front. I've got this one here for this step. Got the two up here on the hood, and then we've got all the ones on the rear. So we'll go ahead and I'll do this first couple here on tape, and then I'll of course go off film and do the rest of them, because this can be pretty boring, I guess, if you want to say that. It's the same thing over and over and over again with these, but there it is. Sometimes, you go to trim these down a little bit and they'll get airborne, and, you lose them to the carpet monster, so to speak. You gotta grab another one. I try not to do that, but that tends to happen from time to time. So a little bit of glue, a little bit of, get this in over here. Oh. These can be a little bit tricky to get to go in there, but so you just got to kind of have a little bit of patience, and they'll go where they're supposed to go. You just got to manage to not get too angry while you're doing this. Because what ends up happening is you'll get a little glue on your tweezers when you're trying to put them in there, and when you go to put the grab iron in its spot, you'll end up with the tweezers, like, pull it back out after you already got it set in there. So sometimes when that happens, you just got to try and get it started into there, and then you can kind of use your X-Acto knife to put that the rest of the way in. But again, it's just a patience game with this part of the project. It's just trying to do a little bit at a time, and if you start getting frustrated, you just got to walk away from it sometimes. It's the one thing about this hobby. It's very rewarding, but it can also really, really be frustrating too, all in a matter of one project. You can be having the best time you ever had building something, and the next minute you're ripping your hair out with it. So go ahead and alright, so we got those first three in there, and before anybody says it, yeah, that one's a little screwy, but I can live with that. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're not really going to see that much anyway once you get the handrails in here, so just the fact there's a grab iron there's yeah, I'll take that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get the rest of these grab irons put on, and then we'll start doing the lift rings. Alright, so we have all our drop style grab irons put in from the front and the back. They're all glued in place. We're all good to go there. Now, before we can do our eye bolts, I forgot that these models do not have the little grab iron that goes like around the back of the fan here. And I imagine you could probably buy them from somewhere, but I do not have those available, so I have to get out the old brass wire here from Detail Associates. I'm not sure if this is really the right size brass wire. It's just what I have laying around. But to make this, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this wire, and I'm going to use the end of my chisel blade. I'm going to pretty much wrap this around it to kind of help form the round deal we need there. Now, as you can see, it's not perfect, but if you look around, normally you can find something that's about the right size to get you where you want. You just got to be creative, like the end of this drill, or the end of this screwdriver. You can do it. Let's see if that'll get us a little closer. It's better. I could work with that. So now what I need to do is take and bend the ends of this down so that we could glue them in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my wire, and I'm going to take it and put it in the edge of this here. I don't know if I'll show up, but I just want enough to fit down through there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bend it. I don't want to put too much pressure down, because if I do, I'll end up cutting that, and I don't want that. So now I need to kind of guesstimate about where that's going to need to be. It should be, yeah, we'll figure right about there. We'll go with that. And we'll go ahead and we'll cut this. This might be too big, but we'll see here once we do a test fit whether it's going to work or not. Worst case, I mean, it's brass wire. It's not the most expensive thing in the world if you make a little bit of a mistake. Have to cut a new piece out, but of course this isn't going to bend roundly, but we'll see what we got here. Go ahead and put that side in and put this side. Oh yeah, that's way too long. Okay, so we have to cut this back a little bit. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, since we need to take a good bit out of it here, I'm going to go ahead and try this right here. I think this might be a little bit closer where we need to be. And then all I'll do is I'll cut off that end there. It's kind of always, when you're doing something like making a specific grab iron like this, you always want to start off with something that you know is going to be a bit on the longer side, but at least kind of give you a little wiggle room for if you do have to trim it back and cut it down. If you start off with too short of a piece, you're going to end up having to cut a new piece over and over and over again if you start off too short. So that doesn't look that. We'll take that. I don't like that. That's a bit too long. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to try and bend this back if I can. Not sure if that's going to want to bend or not. I'm sure this is making for great video right now, because you guys probably can't see it, but now I want to go a little bit farther in than that bend. So we'll go right about there. That should be what I wanted. And of course, when you're using your old track cutters that are a little bit used up for this stuff, it might take a little bit of effort to get them to cut, but I keep trying to find that right spot, and there we go. Now let's try this on for size here and see what this does for us. I think this looks about right. At least it looks about like the ones I can think of from other models I've built. I don't know. Yep. Yep. This is naturally going to want to not be perfectly round, as you guys can tell, but I'm not really going to sweat that too much. Some things just going to be what they're going to be, you know. And I think this is going to be one of them things where it ain't going to be perfect, but it's going to be where it's going to be on there, and that's kind of half the battle sometimes when you're doing this. So yeah, I could live with that. So I'm going to go ahead and get a little glue on each end, same as we did with our grab irons on the front. I think what I might do with these two is I might get a little glue in the holes themselves, just to give us a good start there. Because this wire is a little bit thinner than the grab irons and everything else, yet we drilled the hole the same size as everyone else. These are going to be just a little bit loose, but the glue should kind of help form that up a little bit better. I'll just get that to kind of sit in there. Alright, so there it is on there. You guys can tell there's a little bit of a kink in it, but I can live with that. It's on there. When you're looking at it from the side, as long as it's there, that's kind of the most important part. Of course, you look at it from the top, it's going to be a little goofy, but hey, this is just a demonstrational video here. And I think I've told you guys that 100 times now. This isn't going to be a perfect model. It's just a, you know, I want to give it a good shot here and try and show you guys how to do it. And you know, if little things aren't perfect, how, you know, when we get done, you're not really going to see the little stuff that might not be just right. So we're going to go ahead and we'll start on our lift rings next. These are also, again, my favorite Tichy train group here. I get a lot of stuff from them apparently, but 3037 eye bolts, that's what we're going to be using here. These come on this sprue here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to start cutting these off. What I like to do is I like to cut them about halfway. Leave me some to put in there, but not too much, because I, like everything else, I don't want them sticking around on the inside too much. What we're going to do is we're actually going to start off with these back ones here on the back side of the long hood. These will be the first ones we do. So these, generally, if you've got a good pair of tweezers like I have here, you can grab the eye bolt itself. Let me get that to focus if I can. No, it's not going to want to focus, is it? Well, ain't that annoying. Well, it ain't going to focus on it, so basically you pick it up by the loop of the eye bolt, essentially, and then what you can do is you can just plop it right in the dang hole there. Nice and simple and easy. Almost like they're meant to be like that, so. Now these end ones, I like to put them at a little bit of an angle, because then if I wanted to, on the layout, I could actually put a flag in there, like a red flag, like it's an end of train kind of flag kind of deal. I've seen that in some photos before. I always think it kind of looks neat. I might have a lot of bigger trains on the layout, but at the end of the day, I really enjoy the local yard switching type of stuff. Really, that's kind of what I grew up watching, and it's kind of something I still like to do, is model all the local kind of stuff. But anywho, we'll go ahead and we're going to get a couple more of these on here real quick. Just again, we just cut them a little way on there, not all. You don't want all that grab iron or all that long plastic on there, but enough to put it in there, and enough that the glue will be able to hold it in place. And just a little bit of glue on the end of it. This is another one of those situations here where if you get too much glue on there, you'll have the same problems with the grab irons, where when you go to let go of the eye bolt with the tweezers, it'll get pulled back out by the tweezers. And I'm sure if any of you are working on one of these at home along with this video, you'll be saying the exact same thing, because it can be rather frustrating, but that's just part of the hobby. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get the rest of these installed, and then I'll come back, and I think next we're going to go ahead and we might actually start doing some paint work, believe it or not. I think that's about it for the detail stuff. I'll check the box real quick, but I believe that's it, so I'll be back in a little bit. Alright, while we wait for all our eye bolts and everything to dry before we paint those, let's go ahead and let's start doing some of our black paint we need to do on this unit. One of the things I like to try and do with these to help prevent light bleed is those pieces of styrene I put in to hold our LEDs in place. I like to go in there and try and paint them black before I finish doing all the install work. That way, hopefully, it'll minimize our light bleed. There's always going to be a little bit, but this should at least hopefully keep it to a minimum, and it won't be apparent. It won't be super obvious. We're gonna have a little bit anyhow, because the number boards are gonna light up through the top and everything. But yeah, it's not really that big of a deal. You're not gonna see that unless you're, looking down on the top of the locomotive, and with the lights turned off and the locomotive on, it's going to be a bit difficult to notice something like that. So go ahead, and then this is where it can be a bit tricky, is doing here in the cab. I want to try and get down in here, so that way this box we built out of styrene earlier to hold our headlight, hopefully we won't have any light bleed. But again, that can be a bit of a tricky deal to get enough black in there to cover all the little spots on the inside of that box. But let's see if we, yeah, there we go. Get in there from the front side. Alright, yeah, I could work with that. That'll be alright. So speaking of our cab, while we have it here, go ahead and wipe this paint off the brush, because don't want that to dry on there too bad. But we're going to go ahead now, and we're going to take a micro brush here. We're going to get some black paint on it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the insides of these windows. And what I'm doing this for is basically to make it to paint the window gaskets black. That way it looks like they've all been replaced, because a unit of this age would have had that done, I'd imagine at least, and this is the easiest time to do something like this, is why you have the model all the way apart. But you just get a little paint on the brush and then you paint the inside of this, so nothing overly complicated there. You just gotta watch you don't get too much paint on the outside, because you'll end up with, you know, black paint all over the, yep, like that right there. You'll end up with black paint on everything. And that's when you get your old Q-tip out and you just wipe it off. I always like to keep a lot of Q-tips handy when I'm working on stuff, especially when I'm painting, because you always end up getting a little bit of paint here and there where you didn't want to. Unfortunately, that's just the way it goes sometimes. We'll go ahead and we'll get the inside of these windows here. I just want to barely get a little bit on that top edge. That's really tricky to get that raised part of the gasket that's sticking out of the shell, but I've seen a few other modelers do this, and this looks really, really good when it's all finished, to take this extra minute here and to get the paint in there like that. So we're going to go ahead and do that for our model here, just to add another little bit of pizzazz to this here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get this other one and this back window. And I'll come back to you when I go to do everything on the side window here. We're actually going to be doing that in like a silver to kind of simulate the open window. Alright, so we got our cab set off to the side. Now we're going to let that paint dry, that black that we put on there. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start painting all this black up here, all the every part of the plow that I can get to with a brush. I just want to hit all that with black. Just kind of fill everything in and try to get a good coat on everything. You're going to run into a bit of trouble trying to get down into there, down in between the pilot and the backside of the plow, but that's kind of one of those spots that the handrail kind of blocks, so you don't really see it all too much. So just get as much as you can get down in there, and then move on, you know. So we're going to go ahead, and I got to get the coupler cut lever, of course, because that's all that all needs to be painted as well. All those little holes from that. I'm just going to go ahead and put some on here on the plow. We want to get as much into the back of the plow as we can get. Go ahead and get our MU cables. We'll come back later on and we'll actually paint the little MU end tips and all that stuff. But see, you got a little bit there on the nose. No big deal. You don't really got to worry about little things like that until we start weathering, and even then, you really don't need to worry too much even then, because of how much weathering this locomotive is going to have, and a lot of things are just going to blend in anyhow. So just got to get a good heavy coat on this here. Get it on all the spots, all this where we glued in the coupler cut lever. It's a shame because it's a really nice looking cut lever, and you're barely going to be able to see it because this whole pilot's black, but what are you gonna do? That's the way it goes. So we'll go ahead and get some paint down here. You can throw a little paint on the bottom. Why not? Why not? Let's get a little paint down there. Never hurts to paint the bottom. Go ahead and get a little. See if I get the brush inside of there. Oh yeah, we got that in there. And this is just regular old acrylic paint. I'll tell you, what brand is this here? Anita's all-purpose acrylic craft paint. I got this giant bottle of this stuff, gosh, a couple years ago, and I'm still using it to this day. I think I only paid probably $5-6 for the big bottle. It's lasted me quite well, considering. I mean, you use black paint on almost every project in one way or another, depending on whether it's a freight car or a locomotive or whatever. You might go through a lot of black paint, but it just depends. But we just want to get a good base coat on this. I'm not really all too concerned with it being a little blotchy in spots and stuff, mainly because when we come back and do the weathering, you're not going to see very much of the black anyway. This is more or less just a base coat, just to cover everything up and to give us a good starting point, so that when we start weathering over top of this, there shouldn't be too much There shouldn't be any like odd metal spots showing or anything like that, hopefully. That's at least the idea anyway. We'll see what happens, but let me go ahead and get the back pilot all painted up. And then we're going to go back over to messing around with the cab a little bit. It should be dry enough by then to go ahead and paint the window frames and everything. I have like a silver metal color for that, so I'll come back once we get to that point. Alright, so we got our front and back pilots painted. We're going to go ahead now and we're going to use this A&K Interactive Extreme Metal paint. It's AK475 steel. It's basically like a gray, silverish type color. I kind of like it to use for anywhere that, you know, maybe there's paint wore off of or anything like that. It looks really nice. Now, when I referred to my prototype photo, I did notice that this headlight housing was actually also must have been replaced at some point, so gonna have to try and paint that now, which is not a easy place to paint, just because that's such a thin detail there. But what I'm gonna do is I get a little bit on the brush and just kind of try and work my way around the edges of it here to color over all that blue. This is definitely a bit of a challenge, but if we get it just right, you gotta kind of almost just barely touch the paint to it, and this paint's very thin, so it'll kind of walk down along the edge, and it's got that like silver glittery deal to it. So there we go. Go ahead and get that on there. Yeah, you know what? That actually doesn't look half bad there. Let me focus that now. There we go. That actually turns out pretty nice there, so I'm pretty happy with that. You got a little bit of where it ran off the bottom, but that's not too bad. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do a similar process here on the sides, because I need to do that with these window frames as well. So it's the same as kind of the gaskets we did with the other windows, only this one, since it's like a window frame, we're just going to pretty much do the insides of these window cutouts here. Just get a little bit on the micro brush and work it around. Get this center piece too. Get both sides of that. Get that all done right. The trick with this stuff is it's really easy to get a little bit too much of this on your brush, and then it starts wanting to go everywhere, so you got to be kind of careful how far you put the brush into the paint bottle. But it actually looks pretty good right there. I can live with that. Go ahead and we'll do this other side here. Same exact thing. Just get a little bit on there and paint the inside of this window frame. Also get a little bit on my finger too. I'm gonna roll with that today. Never fails. You always end up getting a little bit on your finger when you're not paying attention, so you'll end up with a painted finger. You know, little color in your life. It's not a bad thing. Alright, so now we get the edges of this window painted up, and of course we got a big spot right there, so we'll get our fancy Q-tip and get that back off of there. Again, we don't need to panic. We're weathering this anyway. So now I'm basically have to play the waiting game here for a little bit. Got to wait for glue to dry. I want to let that black paint I did earlier dry also, and then I could start doing all of the blue touch-up paint, because I got to do the horn, got to do the antennas, the sunshade, the fans, all the grab irons, all the lift rings, all that fun stuff. While we're waiting, maybe we could figure out what color paint we need here. So with Conrail paints, there's always different colors. I made this template here. This is just a piece of styrene that I took a little sample of paint. You see we got Scale Coat, True Color paint, and Badger Model Flex paint here. I just made this template up basically so I could take it and look and see how close the two colors are. It's going to be pretty difficult to tell on the camera because they're all going to look a little bit different than what I'm seeing in person. Now the Scale Coat is a little bit too too bright of a blue. Well, too dark of a blue. This is more of a turquoise, so we'll go down to our true color. And that doesn't look too bad, but it still just doesn't look right on. Same with the Badger. I mean, the Badger and the true color almost look exactly the same, but I don't know if I want to go with the scale coat or the true color. Might end up going with the true color. Yeah, probably going to go with the true color. I think that's going to be what I'm going to go with there. So once all this dries, we'll grab some of my true color paint, and we'll go ahead and we'll start doing all our touch-up painting. Oh, and you know what? Since I already see it here too, one other thing we need to paint black. We need to do our speed recorder cable. Almost forgot about that. You know, I have noticed I'm really good at forgetting these until I go to weather and model and I'm looking at it, and there's the dang cable still that metal color. So let's go ahead and we'll get that coated up. Hey, look at that. Alright, now we can start letting our paint dry. So I will check back in once I go ahead and start doing all the blue touch-up paint. Alright, so we're back here at the workbench. Our paint is dry that we did in the last segment there, the black on all the front detail parts, etc. We're going to go ahead now, we're going to do our blue and hit all of our detail parts with the blue paint that needs them. The last part I said I was going to go with the true color paint, but I kind of looked at it a little more and I decided to go with scale coat Conrail blue. This is scale coat 2 Conrail blue here in a bottle. I'm just going to brush it on. I already went and shook up the paint pretty good and got it mixed pretty well, so I'm just going to go ahead and start putting that on. Now this isn't going to be a perfect match. It is going to be a little bit off, but that'll kind of blend in when we do weathering later. So I'm not super concerned about it. Also, this scale coat paint can be a little bit thin, so I'll probably have to do 2 coats on certain areas just to try and get good coverage on everything. But I'll at least get this first coat just kind of here on film. That way you guys can check this off on the list if you're building something at home along with this video. But we'll go ahead and we'll just get a good heavy coat on there, as heavy as we can at least. I know some folks like to paint their detail parts before they install them. I personally don't like to do that because the problem I run into a lot of times is when you use the CA glue, you end up with like almost like a bleaching effect where you'll get like this white area around where you use the CA glue at, and it doesn't really look too good. So, and also I'm kind of just touching up some spots as I go here, anywhere I got paint early or any of that. So just go ahead and put it on there nice and heavy. Try and get the underside of this cab sunshade here without getting the window. Yeah, we got that pretty good. So that's everything on the roof. Now, as you can kind of tell there, you know, like the antenna and our horn are going to need a second coat, which we'll let this dry for a little bit and we'll come back to it. But we still got to do our cab signal box and all our grab irons. So the cab signal box, we'll go ahead and get a little bit heavy on it with there. Also cover up where we removed the nubs from the old grab iron markings where they didn't match our prototype. I guess if you guys want to look at this as almost like it's just a base coat mainly, that's mainly what you want with your first coat, is just to get a good heavy coat on there, and then you could always come back and kind of touch it up as needed later. Now for like these front grab irons here, right next to the Conrail logo, those can be a bit tricky. It's best to grab a micro brush and do those because you don't want to coat your I'd really like to save that Conrail nose decal if I can and not have to paint over it and redo it. So I'm just going to kind of come in there light and try to just kind of get that area there. Seems like my paint's a little bit thin today. It's the first, this was a brand new bottle I just opened, so it might be a little bit thinner than an older bottle that's been used and opened and closed a few times. But that's the gist of it, guys. Just going through and painting everything. I'll come back once I get a little bit farther through this here and give you guys an update on it. Alright, so I went ahead and shook up the paint a little bit more, hoping that that would kind of help to thick it up a little bit. It was still kind of laying on rather thin, but we have a good coat on the majority of our parts here. We still have to we'll probably have to come back and touch up some of the small stuff, but at least we got a good base coat on there. Now I still have to do these fans here yet, and these you want to do you want to do it in pieces essentially. You don't want to put them on there and like say airbrush the whole thing together. That's not going to work out too well. You'll lose a lot of your detail in it, like the fan blades and all that. So I'll paint these housings and such here first, and then I'll come back and I'll paint all the outside parts after I get these housing areas painted. But what we can do here is all that area we putty, we're just going to put a nice coat of paint on there, and that should for the most part cover up anywhere where maybe our putty job wasn't very good. It'll kind of hide that. And then again later on when we do the weathering, that'll also kind of do a good bit there to help hide any of that, kind of keep that from being obvious where we might have gotten a little excited when we were dremeling and messed that up. So let's get a nice coat on, even on the inside of the fans. I like to paint these whole deals up. Maybe comment down below there if you've had trouble with paint coming in a little bit too thin, or maybe buying a different bottle than, opening up a new bottle and having it be like thinner than previous ones. I just opened this bottle of this scale coat, and I'm kind of puzzled as to why it's so much thinner than it usually is. Normally it's a little bit thicker and it's easier to work with, but it could just be those metal detail parts as well. Sometimes the paint doesn't really want to stick to those, but you gotta get paint on them, so kind of is what it is there. But we're gonna get all this painted up here, nice heavy coat of paint, and then what we'll do is we'll actually do all the lighting work and all the assembly for like the wiring and sound and everything. And one of the last parts we'll do before we do all the weathering work is we'll go in and we'll finish up these fans by putting them the rest of the way together. Now the fans, there's two pieces here we got to do. This is all of your parts that will hold the fan blade in, so these need to be painted blue. So we'll go ahead and get a coat of blue on these here. I don't believe these you really need to get too carried away with doing both sides, but I may be mistaken. Correct me down in the comments if I'm wrong on that, but if not, we'll find out when we put it together. And just kind of get a good coat of blue on them, because it's going to be a little bit difficult to see them, especially through the fan shroud, but the main thing you're going to be seeing is these fans themselves. So these covers can be a bit of a pain because they weren't going to want to take paint very well. I could tell that already. But you don't want to paint the fan blades themselves. You just want to paint these covers. And of course, these aren't going to want to take paint because that's the way the cookie crumbles there. But we'll try and get that on there, and hopefully that'll kind of dry out a little bit and at least get a little bit of blue paint on them. Maybe that's going to be our technique there. Just get some on it and wipe it down with the Q-tip to try and keep it from blobbing up in between those between the little grates in there. You don't want to fill that all up with paint. That'll look not so good. So yeah, it actually is it's getting a little bit of blue to it. It's not going to show up on the camera very well, I imagine, but they are starting to get a bit of a bluish tint to it. So maybe this might be the ticket here. Just kind of get some of that blue paint on there. The last time I used these, I was actually painting a model completely. So I just airbrushed these parts when I was doing the rest of the painting on the model. But with this being a something I'm not going to do a full repaint on, I'm kind of in a bit of a box there because I don't want to get the airbrush out and mix up all the paint just to do this little bit. That would be bit of a pain in the rear end. 'Cause I love using this scale coat paint. It has a really nice color to it, and it covers very well normally when you airbrush it. But I'm not a big fan of the cleanup on it. It always seems to be a bit of a struggle to clean out the airbrush after you use it. So now our last piece we need to do blue paint on is going to be our doors, our KV cab doors we did earlier. You guys remember there's where we painted the back. Now we got to paint the front of them. So I'm actually going to go with the micro brush for this, just because I really want to try not to get any paint on the back side of this, although it's kind of it's more than likely going to happen, but I'd like to try and keep some paint from going on the back as much as I can. So I'll just use this micro brush and try and get it as well as I can. I'm going to end up coming back and painting around the edge of this with black paint anyway to simulate a cab seal around the door that's been replaced. So it's not super crucial, but I would prefer not to get too much paint on the back that I have to try and cover up with black later. So try to be somewhat cautious with this, but you know, back to our whole mantra on this project is to, you know, get it as good as we can, but not rip our hair out in the process. That's the be all end all goal, and that's really the goal with model railroading, is really just to have fun at the end of the day. So once we get this on there, we will officially be done with this portion of the project, which is going to be all of our detailing kind of work and all that. Now, before I put the paint away, I'm going to take my shell and make sure I didn't miss anything. Like I see a little spot right here. Get that. And just make sure I have a good coat of blue on everywhere that needed to get blue. Sometimes you could like forget these little lift rings on the side, or maybe where you kind of caught it with the paint a little bit. But alright guys, so that's going to be the end of the detailing assembly part, I believe is what I'll call this. In the next part, we're going to go ahead and we'll probably be ready to start in with all of our wiring and DCC work, all of our lights and everything, the front and rear ditch lights, marker lights, number boards, and front and rear headlights. So that will be the next portion of this project that I'll put together. That'll be its own video, and after that we'll do the final assembly work and off to weathering. So hopefully you guys will join me in the next part for all the DCC work.